December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. This is one of the most profound phrases ever uttered by a U.S. president. Franklin Roosevelt made this enduring statement when declaring war on Japan after the attack at Pearl Harbor. Our U.S. Pacific Fleet lay in ruins after that fateful day, and it fell to a heroic group of Navy divers to get us back in action and provide closure for the many families who lost loved ones that day. One of these divers was Edward C. Raymer. Commander Raymer's book, Descent into Darkness, is a chronicle of the work he did along with his fellow divers at Pearl Harbor after the attack. Edward Raymer enlisted in the Navy in 1939 with the hopes of being a naval aviator. Back then, the Navy didn't have enlisted pilots. Not sure when the requirement to be an officer came about. But in any event, Edward wasn't able to get into the aviation program, so while stationed in San Diego at the destroyer repair unit, he and his friend Robert Moons Mullins decided to volunteer for the 4-week second-class diving school. That was in May 1941. After diving school, he returned to the destroyer repair unit, where they tried to practice their diving skills. Now, right after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the word went out that all divers were to report to the office, and they were informed that they had 2 hours to pack and head out. Their destination was Pearl Harbor. Now, each chapter of the book outlines the specific diving and salvage efforts of each of the ships that Raymer and his team worked on. They started out on the USS Nevada, then proceeded to the USS Utah, followed by the famous USS Arizona, the USS California, the USS West Virginia, and the USS Oklahoma. You can see that this was a monumental effort of courage and stamina. Not only did Raymer and Mullins do all this diving at Pearl Harbor, they also saw action in the South Pacific when they were on temporary orders to the USS Seminole in August 1942. The Seminole was dispatched to the Solomon Islands, and those temporary orders lasted until April 1943. Now, I have read a lot of books about the Navy's fighting in the Solomon Islands and the losses of ships, but never have I read about it from the perspective of those who were tasked with salvage and rescue after the destruction. It's a great perspective. One of the things that is really interesting about this memoir is how the divers had to learn and develop procedures and protocols along the way. Early on, they had an issue with the welding torches, unburned gas collecting in areas and then causing explosions. One of the divers came up with the idea of using an arc oxygen underwater cutting torch, something he had seen while working on a pipeline in Texas. And there are many more examples of things that they had to learn while on the job. Very early in the book, Raymer tells us about his accident while making an early dive on the USS Arizona. The Navy had visions of raising part of the Arizona, but they believed there was an unexploded torpedo in the hull. The divers were tasked with getting it out. Raymer's did the first dive, and about an hour into the dive, his air supply was cut off. Turns out some yard workers had disconnected the compressor. The air was restored, and he was rescued by his shipmates, but badly shaken. After the dive, the Navy decided no additional diving would be done on the Arizona at that time, and attention would be given to the less damaged ships, like the California and the West Virginia. Now, those of us who have served in the military, we know that there are things that happen that are sometimes like a comedy show. For example, Edward tells us about how while they were deciding on what to do about the USS Arizona, one of the officers from the USS Utah got permission to use the divers on the Utah. His mission was to recover the ship's office safe that supposedly had over $3,000 in it. He would keep $2,000 and the rest would be split between the divers. Well, the estimate was off, and there was only $1,900 in the safe. The divers lost out. Now, there are other exploits of the divers not related to salvage that makes me think a little bit of the TV show MASH. First, the divers built a still in their dive shack. They somehow didn't quite know how to operate the device, and it exploded, covering their commanding officer in sour mash. Then there are the escapades with the locals. After salvaging alcohol from one of the ships, they proceeded to have various parties with the local ladies. The boys had a little fun after the difficult task of salvaging the battleships. Throughout the course of the book, Commander Raymer vividly recalls many of the triumphs and tragedies associated with the historic work that he and the members of the dive team performed at Pearl Harbor. Their work continued until final salvage operations were wrapped up and he and Moons left Hawaii for San Francisco on March 2nd, 1944. He recalls passing the burned-out hulk of the Arizona and rendering honors, then rounding Ford Island, passing the remains of the USS Utah. Now that brought back a lot of memories for me. Having served at Pearl Harbor, we routinely passed by the Arizona Memorial with the solemnity that it deserves, and the image of the hull of the USS Utah still is fresh in my mind's eye. Now, we have a deep and rich history in diving with many heroes who paved the way. If you want to learn more about one of those heroes, check out Descent into Darkness, Pearl Harbor, 1941, a Navy diver's memoir.